Welcome to Grace Fellowship Baptist Church Wednesday evening Bible study for Wednesday, October 27th, 2021. Today is Monday, October 4th, 2021, and we're continuing with the Samson Saga. And tonight we're finally getting to the story that everybody knows about Samson and Delilah. And we're going to finish up his saga tonight. And he's a very tragic character, and unfortunately, this shows the tragic nature of him. But he was blessed of God in amazing ways, and as I pointed out, if he had been obedient to God better, he could have done amazing things. But God still used him, and as tragic as he is, as foolish as he is, as stupid as he does things, he was still used by God to do exactly what God wanted him to do. God wanted him to stir up trouble and cause the downfall of Philistia. And he does that. So we're in Judges chapter 16 tonight. We're going to start in verse 1. One day Samson went up to Gaza, where he saw a prostitute. He went to spend the night with her. The people of Gaza were told, "Samson is here." So they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the city gate. They made no move during the night, saying, "At dawn we'll kill him." Now, at the end of chapter 15, we read that he ruled Israel for 20 years. So, he's ruled Israel for 20 years. The Philistines know they're mad at him the whole time. They can't do anything to him, and they know that, and then he's foolish. He goes to Philistia, to their stronghold, and he goes into a prostitute. How foolish. On many different levels. For one thing, going to Philistia. Number two, going into a prostitute. You know the prostitute's not faithful to you, not loyal to you. You know it's a bad idea on the face of it. How stupid. And then he spends the night with her. Okay, I understand what he's doing. He's having his fun. He's paid his price. He's having his fun. The thing is, the men of Gaza know this is their opportunity. Now, they do a foolish mistake here. They underestimate Samson. They should know what Samson's like. They should know that they've got to attack fast and strong. But let's face it, they don't want to harm her. They don't want to harm her house. They're not mad at her. They're planning to catch him when he leaves in the morning. And they think he's spending the night. And so they just lie in wait. And they expect that, they'll catch him in the morning. And they'll just wake up and catch him. And they fall asleep in the public place. Verse 3, but Samson lay there only until the middle of the night. Then he got up and took hold of the doors of the city gate, together with the two posts, tore them loose, bar and all. He lifted them to his shoulders and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. Now, Gaza to Hebron is about 25 miles. He carries a city gate with its bar and the two gate posts, 25 miles, from midnight to dawn. Best evidence, a typical city gate in that day and time is with its two posts and the bar on it is probably in excess of a ton. He is a hugely strong man. And he has the strength to not just pick it up, but rip it out of the ground. Let's face it, you don't put that on nice little posts that are barely in the ground. They're in the ground solidly so that an army coming up and attacking it doesn't shake it loose. And he has the strength to do it by tiptoeing through the men, grabbing the gate, while they're asleep, picking it up, and walking off with it, leaving their city open and exposed. And he has the strength to carry it 25 miles over a day's travel before dawn. And then he leaves it at another city as a gift. And to tell everybody, yeah, Gaza's open. Y'all can go attack it if you need to. That's the kind of strength he has. And he wasted on things like going into a prostitute. How very foolish. But God's using him to set up this fight. He's ruled for 20 years. He's made things better. He's broken up the status quo where the Israelites are getting used to just being ruled by the Philistines. And he's made it so they're beginning to think, we should rule ourselves instead of being ruled with the Philistines. And maybe, if Samson leads us correctly, we can do this. But instead of leading them to overthrow, let's face it, if Samson had used that same kind of strength and with a little bit of wisdom, he could have had the army camped out in the field and says, hey guys, I'm going to go in. I'm going to spend the night with the prostitute. They're going to think I'm spending all night. About midnight, I'm going to get up, rip the door off, the gate off, and carry it off. And y'all go in and attack and raise the city and kill a bunch of sleeping people. And y'all win a great victory. And, after I drop the gate off over somewhere else, I'll come back and help you. And we'll clean up the place. If he had been smart about it, if he'd been wise about it, he could have destroyed Gaza and, all its people. He could have done what God told Moses and Joshua, kill everybody. And they hadn't yet done yet. But he doesn't. He just has his, night of sex and then leaves. How tragic. God gave him that kind of strength, and he only used it for his own pleasure. He didn't lead his people to do what they should have done. He didn't lead them to be more moral. He didn't, the other cases, it was a case of revenge. He could have thought this through and done an amazing job. He could have even just, gone, I'm going to appear moral. I'm going to come in with a basket full of vegetables and go to the market and sell them and make sure I dawdle. And it's too late at night. No, I got to camp in the town square. And then I'll let y'all in about midnight. He doesn't even do that. I find it doubly tragic because he could have done so much more. And he could have done more and survived it. But because he was immoral and God had to use his passions against him, he ends up losing his life with it. But he's provoking this fight, and he's winning it so far, and he's just doing it because he doesn't know any better. And God's using him to stir up the trouble, to cause the Israelites to quit accepting being slaves. It's a vast tragedy. They've been slaves, the Philistines, now 60 years. 40 years before he was born. And then he ruled for 20 years. So it's been more than 60 years because he had to grow up in the meantime. It's been a long time. They should have already thrown off the Philistines and already organized. And they're just accepting it. And God has to shake up the status quo. And so he puts this very strong, very tragic figure, Samson, in, and has him stir up the trouble. And the Israelites start realizing they don't have to be slaves the rest of their lives. And Samson shows them that. But he stirs up that trouble because God has to provoke him, but not because he doesn't even have his own vainglory in mind. He just has his own. Hey, I want to eat honey. I want to eat. You know, I want to wear 30 pieces of clothing. I want to get revenge because you killed my wife. Well, you married my wife off. I'm going to get revenge because y'all killed my wife because I got revenge on. And oh yeah, just don't kill me yourself, and just let me go get my revenge. And he picks up a improvised weapon, a jawbone of a donkey, and he kills 1,000 men. If he had used those same skills he had in a skillful way, he could have been a mighty king. Even if it just he ruled for 20 years and dies, and he dies of natural death, he could have been a very heroic character. But he doesn't. He just lives life by his passions, and he's controlled by his passions. And fortunately, God can control him with his passions, and his revenge and his lust get him in a lot of trouble, but God keeps him out of trouble with his great strength. And he does amazing things, but he's not smart with it. Verse 6, sometime later, he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, see if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength and how we can overpower him so that we may tie him up and subdue him. Each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver. That's each one of them give her 28 pounds of silver. So she's going to get, if there was 5 lords of the Philistines, 240 pounds of silver. That's a lot. They're offering her quite a bribe, particularly in the day and time when about the amount of silver that would be made into a ring that you could wear on your hand would buy you, a month's worth of wheat to eat. She's going to go from just being normal, everyday woman to being wealthy. If she can turn Samson over to them. So that, and they're not asking her to do it, just give us the information so we can overpower him. Figure it out. Spend some time. Do whatever it takes. They propose a good deal, and she knows that she's there to ensnare him. But she knows what's in it for her. She's going to come out of here not just slightly wealthy. She's going to come out of here a very wealthy woman. She does not have to work a day in her life ever again. She can just sit on her pile of money and pay for whatever she wants to and live the life she wants to do whatever she wants to do for the rest of her life. And she will have the friendship of everybody in town. Just for betraying the guy that likes her. And she probably is, just like a lot of the other Philistines. I'm having fun with sex, and he's, he's willing to pay good money for it. So, I'm fine with this. And, I'll get even paid more. I can get from him and y'all both. Yeah. And get revenge and make my people great again. Yeah. And me be wealthy. Yeah, I can do this. I mean, she's got a prostitute's heart. I mean, she's in it for herself. Goes from he's got lust for her for a couple of days or months, and to I can be wealthy and I don't have to put up with him or y'all, and I can, yeah. She's no better than he is. In one sense, she has a more realistic plan than he. All she has to do is figure out why he's strong and get it so that the Philistines can overpower him. And she doesn't have to do it in any set time limit. She can just keep having fun while she figures it out. And keep going, keep going, and keep going. And there's no implication that she has to be faithful to him. I mean, she's a Philistine. She can continue to be a Philistine and do everything the Philistines do. Worship with their gods, worship their festivals. She's not his wife. She's just his girlfriend that lives way off yonder, that he has to keep bringing gifts to participate with her. Poor guy. She knows her task, and she's up to it. And we know she succeeds. The Philistines, though, are going about this wrong too. God's intentionally having them be foolish because they want to arrest him and stick him in prison. When they had him down, they should have just killed him. I mean, if they really wanted to win, they should have just killed him when they had the chance. They didn't. They wanted to gloat. In some senses, they're no better than him. But God's against them. So their weakness also gets used against them. Verse 6. So Delilah said to Samson, "Tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued." Samson answered her, "If anyone ties me with 7 fresh thongs that have not been dried, I become as weak as any other man." She knows he's out to get her. He knows she's out to get him. And he lies to her. He is so confident in his own strength, in his own abilities, and that he's going to always win. Let's face it, he's always managed to get out ahead. When the first woman got the riddle out of him, he came out ahead in the long run. Big revenge cycle, several different back and forths. He lost his woman. He killed a bunch of people. He has this history, and he thinks, yeah, I can lie to her and still have my fun and get away with it too. And when they come to me after she does this, yeah, I just snap the bowstrings and kill a bunch of them and go on. I mean, he's not learned his lessons that he should have learned. That revenge cycles aren't good for you. They aren't good for the countryside. They aren't. But God's using him to cause this problem. And the Philistines aren't going to use it wisely, aren't going to use it smartly. But he hasn't learned. Philistine women will betray you. He should have just simply told her, "You can't know, woman. I'm leaving and never coming back, and I'm done." But no, his passions are still ruling him. He lies to her and goes off. Verse 8. Then the rulers of the Philistines brought her 7 fresh thongs that had not been dried, and she tied him with them. With men hidden in the room, she called him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you!" But he snapped the thongs as easily as a piece of string snaps when it comes close to a flame. So the secret of his strength was not discovered. Now, he should know at this point, she's intentionally betraying him. She used the lie that he told her. he's thinking he's invulnerable. I've always gotten out of this. Doesn't matter. I can have my fun. She can try to betray me, and I'll still get out of it. He doesn't realize the trap he's in. He should have just left. Been mad at her too, but he didn't. He should have killed the men that were lying in wait when he broke free. But they realized, oh, he's free. They skedaddled. They left. Verse 10. Then Delilah said to Samson, "You have made a fool of me. You lied to me. Now, come on now. Tell me how you can be tied." He said, "If anyone ties me securely with new ropes that have never been used, I'll become as weak as any other man." Again, he's lying to her. Let's face it, the men of Judah did that to him. But he broke them. He's playing with her. He's playing with them. He doesn't realize the danger he's in. And he doesn't remember a woman wheedling him can get him to tell the truth. And they're going after the truth here. They're going after what it takes to destroy him. And he's gonna eventually cave to a woman. Because that's his weakness. He's controlled by his lust. And he's eventually going to tell her the truth and tell her the secret. And then he's going to be damaged irreparably. Almost. Except God's not finished with him yet. Verse 12. So Delilah took new ropes and tied him with them. Then with men hidden in the room, she called to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." But he snapped the ropes off his arms as if they were threads. Delilah then said to Samson, "Until now you have been making a fool of me and lying to me. Tell me how you can be tied." He replied, "If you weave the 7 braids of my hair into the fabric on the loom and tighten it with the pin, I will become as weak as any other man." So while he was sleeping, Delilah took the 7 braids of his hair, wove them into the fabric, and tightened it with a pin. Again she called to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He awoke from his sleep and pulled up the pin and the loom and the fabric. Now, he is continuing his pattern of lying to her, but he's beginning to weaken. Before, he's talked about how you tie him. Tying him is the unimportant part. He's so strong, there's nothing that can tie him effectively. I'm not sure even in our day and time we have the kind of ties that would take to keep a man that can pick up the city gates and carry him 25 miles in a night and set him down tied. I'm not sure that's possible. That's ridiculously strong. He's just amazingly strong. And, but he's beginning to weaken in that he's finally admitting it's his hair, not what you tie him with. And so she continues to betray him. It's not like he should be surprised that she betrays him. She's been doing exactly what he told her would weaken him. And he's beginning to cave. He's beginning to get closer to the truth. And he's getting away with it still. But he's being foolish. He's getting closer and closer to telling her the truth. And it's going to be the death of him. Verse 15. Then she said to him, "How can you say I love you when you won't confide in me? This is the 3rd time you've made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength." With much nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was tired to death. Let's face it, he didn't learn the lesson with the first wife. She nagged him for 4 days, and he finally gave in. He's older. It takes him longer. It's a bunch of days, 3 times in a row, and then she nags and nags and nags and nags and nags. and he's worn out. Eventually, he quits trying to lie to her. Verse 17. So he told her everything. No razor has ever been used on my head, he said, because I have been a Nazarite set apart to God since birth. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man. Now, that is the truth. If he cuts his hair, he won't be a Nazarite anymore. He won't be blessed of God. Thing is, he could have picked any other part of the Nazarite vow to violate. He could have said, I've never drank wine, I've never eaten grapes, I've never eaten raisins. If I eat anything alcoholic, drink anything alcoholic, I'll break my vow and I'll be as weak as any man. If I eat anything from a grapevine, even grape leaves, I'll have broke my vow and I'll be as weak as any man. He could have said, I've never eaten anything unclean, and if I do so, I will break my vow and no longer be a Nazarite, and I will be weak. I mean, he had lots of things, but apparently he was proud of his hair. Like a lot of men that have really long hair, and I'm sure it took some tending. It said it was in 7 braids. And let's face it, you don't braid 7 braids of hair on a head of hair that's never been cut. That's a lot of effort without, tending to it and being proud of it. And it was probably, his status symbol, his style symbol, and they probably were just thinking, yeah, he's just vain. And they don't realize that, God's blessing him because he has fulfilling the vow that his parents made before he was born, that he would be a Nazarite given to God, and that it's his hair. Now, if he hadn't told them they'd just come in and shaved his hair, God wouldn't have recognized that he broke his vow. They were just into harming. But because he told her, and he weakened, and he told her that he was a Nazarite and that he shaved his head, then, because of that, if they had just said, hey, he's proud of his hair, let's shave his head in his sleep and see, if we can get him so angry he can't do anything or whatever. It's just humiliating. God wouldn't have said, oh, you violated your vow. They probably would have said, they tried to get you to violate your vow. I'm going to make you twice as strong. You can kill them all. If they'd figured it out and tried, Samson would probably have been blessed by God. But because he gave in and told the secret, then when his head is shaved, God curses him and says, you're no longer strong. Verse 18, when Delilah saw that he had told her everything, she sent word to the rulers of the Philistines, come back once more, he has told me everything. So the rulers of the Philistines returned with the silver in their hands. Having put him to sleep on her lap, she called a man to shave off the 7 braids of his hair, and so began to subdue him, and his strength left him. She knew when he finally told her the truth, and wasn't lying to her, and that things had changed, and she had her chance. And she told them, and they realized, hey, this sounds like it could be. This has spiritual implications, and this guy is supernaturally strong, and this is probably it. They probably understood the Nazarite vow even better than he did. They'd probably seen other Israelites with Nazarite vows and what they had to do, and realized, he's a Nazarite vow. He's dedicated to God, and God's doing this through him. Yeah, we know the history. We know what's going on. And so she puts him to sleep in her lap. She seems to be so loving. She's cuddling him to sleep, and so nice. She's a piece of work. And then she calls in the barber, who cuts off his hair, and his strength leaves him. And she knows it, and he doesn't yet know it. She doesn't even tie him up. She just cuts the hair. And she doesn't even do it herself. She has a barber do it. She hires a barber. And the Philistine leaders, they're so certain of this. They bring the money. It's not like, we'll pay you later. No, we're going to pay you up front. We're going to get this done. Verse 20. Then she called, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He woke up from his sleep and thought, I'll go as before and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. Then the Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Gaza. Binding him with bronze shackles, they set him to grinding in the prison. But the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. So, they don't have to bind him. They just grab him. Strength has left him. God's no longer blessing him. And he can't even shake off men with him not being bound. And so they capture him. And they humiliate him by blinding him, gouging out his eyes. And they put him in prison. They bind him with bronze fetters. And they basically turn him into a beast of burden. In that day and time, commercial millers that ground grain commercially would have this huge millstone. Some of them were weighing several hundred to several thousand pounds, and they would have it in a big bottom stone that would be 5 to 10 times that weight, and it have an ox turning it. It would be so heavy that to grind the grain, it would take an ox walking in circles. And so they're humiliating him by substituting him for the ox, and they've put him there grinding grain. And this is great fun for them. They've captured their villain. They're humiliating him, making him a beast of burden. He's grinding grain for everybody. All they got to do is give him enough food and water to keep him alive and just make him work. And he's blind. He can't do anything. He can't escape. He doesn't know his way around, blah, blah, blah. They think they've won. And they have great fun humiliating him. But God has other things in mind. And God has his hair grow again. Verse 23. Now the rulers of the Philistines assembled to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to celebrate, our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands. So they're holding this festival after he's been grinding a grain a while. And let's face it, grinding grain is going to keep him strong, can keep him able to do things, and allow him to regain his strength as his hair grows. God still has one more axe of revenge for him. And it's going to be the one that actually does the most damage to the Philistines, because it's not the number of people he killed. It is the people he killed. He kills the leaders of society, the very ones that organize society. And they're praising their god, their false god, Dagon, for being stronger. Now, part of the mindset in the Middle East at that time is the strongest god would win on the battlefront. If two peoples that had two different gods were fighting, the gods were fighting, and the stronger god would win the battle. Well, they're praising their god for having won by conquering Samson, and that he's stronger than their God is stronger than Samson. Well, if he's really a God, yes, of course he is. But if he's not a God, you may have won short term, but you hadn't won. And they're not fighting the Israelites. They want them as slaves. They want their labor without, their taxes and whatever, without having to, do anything to input anything to make their lives better. And but they're going to have fun making fun of Samson, mocking him, and praising their God. 24. When the people saw him, they praised their God, saying, "Our God has delivered our enemy into our hands, the one who laid waste our land and multiplied our slain." While they were in high spirits, they shouted, "Bring out Samson to entertain us." So they called Samson out of the prison, and he performed for them. When they stood him among the pillars, Samson said to the servant who held his hand, "Put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple, so that I may lean against them." Now, Samson has probably realized he's got his strength back and his hair's grown. He knows he can't see, he can't fight well, but he also probably understands that there's weaknesses here. And the physical setup is they have a temple with multiple stories, and the roof is flat, and it's where this feast is, and all these leaders are up there, and they're making fun of him. He's downstairs, and they've made him do humiliating things to entertain them. And when they get tired of making fun of him, the guy that leads him around, he asks him, "I'm tired, let me lean against the pillars." He's acting like he doesn't have any strength. But he knows if the pillars go, the temple collapses. And they didn't have great construction techniques that we have today where, if one pillar goes, but the whole building collapsed. They depended upon everything being there. They put the minimum number it took to keep it all going. There was no spare. If you could take down one pillar, it would all collapse. And he probably knows that. They've probably had, earthquakes or pillars that weren't put in right and they collapsed and the building collapsed. And, he's pretending like, okay, I'm just tired, put me against the pillar. But he knows that if he can push the pillar down and he's getting strong enough to do it again, that he can cause the building collapse and kill a bunch of people in the building collapse. So he's asking, "Put me next to the pillar." And so the servant's like, "Sure, you're tired. They're tired of making fun of you for right now. They're feasting. They're drinking their wine. They're eating their fancy food. I can let you lean against the pillar for a little while. You can rest up. So we need to make you dance and entertain us again." Verse 27, "Now the temple was crowded with men and women. All the rulers of the Philistines were there, and on the roof were about 3,000 men and women watched Samson perform." So, all the leaders were there to make fun of him, to see him, to know and gloat, and they're having their revenge. And so they're going to, if Samson can kill him, he's going to decapitate the Philistine society. They're not going to be the leaders. Verse 28. "Then Samson prayed to the Lord, 'O sovereign Lord, remember me. O God, please strengthen me just once more, and let me, with one blow, get revenge on the Philistines for my two eyes.'" So he's still revenge-oriented. Verse 29. "Then Samson reached toward the two central pillars on which the temple stood. Bracing himself against them, his right hand on the one and his left hand on the other, Samson said, 'Let me die with the Philistines.' Then he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. Thus he killed many more when he died than while he lived." So he was still seeking revenge for his eyes. He wanted to kill the people that were mocking him. Uh, but he was also willing to acknowledge that God was the one that gave him the strength. And so God was willing to give him strength one more time. He was also willing to sacrifice himself this time. Not just, I'm going to be my passions and my wants. He was asking God, let me do your will and destroy these people that need to be destroyed. And I'm willing to give up my life to make it happen. And God granted him that request. He was strong enough to push the pillars over, and the temple collapsed. And the 3,000 people on the roof, and who knows how many below, probably all the servants and the other slaves, possibly other prisoners, there was lots of people involved. And he killed many more in his death than he killed in his life. He had bedeviled them all his life and ruled for 20 years as a judge. But in his death, he killed more. And he killed more important people. Before that, he'd killed commoners and common soldiers and things like that. Devastating society. I mean, if you kill 1,000 men in an army, that's a blow. But that was out of a 10,000 man army. There were still 9,000 men alive that ran away that day. But in this, he killed the leaders, the priests, the kings, the mayors, the city council members, the yada, yada, yada. The leaders of society that organized it and kept it going, the generals, everybody that was important to keeping the Philistines organized and going. So he struck a much greater blow than if he'd just gone out to the army and killed, 3,000 men. Yeah, that would have been devastating and serious. But he killed the people that made it happen. And because of that, Philistine society was disorganized and chaotic. And they had to find new leaders, and new leaders had to rise up. And in the meantime, the men of Judah could assert their own independence and throw off the yoke of the Philistines and again become independent people under God. And so Samson, in that blow, did more to free Israel than he had done in all of his life. If he'd used his strength properly, he could have done that probably 20 years before. Let's face it, if you can pick up the city gates and walk off with them, you can use that kind of strength in battle, but you can also use it to make the city open and vulnerable and lead an army in and do devastating damage. And they could have won, but no, he has to follow his passions. Yeah, he rules. He does a lot of the damage to the Philistines along the way, but he gets put in prison. It's got to be at least months or years he's in prison before his hair grows back out, to the point God is willing to bless him again. And then he has to die for the people to be free. He can't enjoy the fruits of his labor because he did it wrong. He followed his own passions. God still had him do the great work God built him for, and that he told his mother that he would do, that he would begin the process of freeing the people from the Philistines. But it's 20 plus years later when he could have done it during his lifetime. Well, he leads the Israelites for 20 years. That's after he becomes an adult. Let's face it, let's assume that he's 13 when he sees the woman and he's old, just barely old enough to get married. And that's when he does the damage because he burns the fields and all that. And that does sound like a teenager, doesn't it? Let's put a minimum age on that, So he's 36 when they put out his eyes. Minimum. Or 33. minimum. And let's say it's 3 years in prison. He's 36. That's where I got the number, sorry. And, you know, um, yeah, that's a decent age in that society, full adult, and people would be following. But, you know, if he'd used that same thing with cunning back 20 years before, he could have overthrown the Philistines, killed them all. They could have been living in Gaza as an Israelite city. Because if you can pick up the city gates, if you can organize men to go attack it with no city gates, they're sitting ducks. They're depending on that wall and that gate holding, and you can pick it up and walk off with it. You know, that wall's not protecting you. That gate's not protecting you. You know, they could have won, but no, he more interested in pleasing himself, and he falls prey to the wiles of a woman that's immoral, and so he has to die to win. Verse 31, then his brothers and his father's whole family went down to get him. They brought him back and buried him between Zohar and Eshtal in the tomb of Manoah his father. He had led Israel 20 years. So in the end, yeah, he gets buried with honors because he's destroyed the Philistine society and their ability to control the Israelites. And by leading Israel for 20 years, he's able to break their hold on him. But he doesn't get to enjoy the fruits of that. God's people do. They get to bear the fruits. And like, you know, God told his mother, he will begin the process of breaking the hold of the Philistines. Obviously, since he had brothers, his mother had other sons, and they, you know, got to enjoy the fruits of his labors. And they honored him. They buried him with honors. But he didn't get to enjoy it because he followed his plan, his evil plan, instead of doing a better plan that God had in place, because he didn't obey God. How tragic. Samson is one of those other judges that we use as a negative example. If you don't obey God, you don't do it as well as you could have. I mean, with his great strength, if he had obeyed God, if he had even gone, I'm not a smart man, let's go down to Shiloh and ask the priest to ask God what I should do with this. If he had said simply, I'm going to obey God, I'm going to marry an Israelite woman, and I'm going to lead the way God says to lead. I mean, he could have led Israel into glory himself and been honored and died of old age and been buried in the same spot, and his family honor him greatly, and we could have had great stories about the first king of Israel, King Samson, instead of remembering Delilah. Remembering the prostitute, remembering the woman and her father. You know, it's a sad case. Samson was betrayed by women all of his life. And because he chose the wrong women, they betrayed him. And he did not get to use his strength for his own benefit. Yes, people benefited because God raised him up to benefit them and help begin the process of freeing Israel. But it's going to be a long while before they actually win. There's other stories. We're going to read other stories, and in the rest of Judges, we're going to find out what happened to the rest of the Danites. They do move. They get tired of the Philistines and they move away. It's a long and complicated story. we're still a long way from Samson, First Samuel, from Samuel being born, um, and finally starting to lead Israel correctly. And Samuel has to lead Israel for 40 years before he raises up Saul. And then Saul leads Israel 40 years before he raises up David. And then David finally takes 40 years to conquer the Philistines. Saul does a part of the job. Let's face it, it's a while yet to Samuel, and from Samuel to Solomon is over 120 years before they finally win. That's because Samson had fatal weaknesses. He was an immoral man, controlled by his own lust, controlled by his own emotions, controlled by his inflated opinion of himself, and that he was able to do whatever he wanted to do instead of doing things God's way. Have that be a lesson for you. Consult God. Seek out His wisdom. Realize that it's as we work together in God's kingdom, for God's kingdom, that He blesses. And that it's not for our vainglory. It's not by our strength or our will or our smartness, our intelligence, our cleverness. It's not us. It's God working through us. And when He works through us together as a group, when we work together according to His will, according to what He's told us to do, we can do greater things. And it's when David organizes the people to obey God first and then work together that finally God wins and they can get to control things. And Solomon gets to live in peace and gets to rule for 40 years without the Philistines bothering him. But this is the beginning of the downfall of the Philistines. And they never, ever completely recover. They're on a downhill trajectory from that. Yeah, they momentarily get ahead a few times between there because the people, again, disobey God and worship other gods. Samson didn't lead them to worship God. He worshipped himself. He didn't worship other gods. He nominally gave credit to God, but he didn't succeed. And so he dies without getting any of the benefit of the glory he brings to Israel. Almighty God, you are the Lord of hosts, the King of kings, the Lord of lords. You are the one who guides human history. It will happen exactly as you want it to. But Lord, you also bless your people, that as we follow you and obey you, that as we humble ourselves before you and pray and seek your face and turn from our wicked way and do things your way, then you will lead us into prosperity and peace and strength. But if we do things our way, you can still use us as your vessel to achieve your end, but we won't be blessed for it. And you instead will curse us. Lord, help us to learn that lesson. Have us to understand it and be wise about it. That we will be humble before you. That we will pray and ask your will. That we will seek your face and learn your ways and do it your way. And quit doing it our way, which is evil. And will repent and do it your way. Lord, help us to learn that lesson. It's many places in Scripture. We've seen it through multiple judges. But Samson is so strong. Have us to learn from his negative example. To do it your way. To do it the way you've told us to do it. In your holy name, Lord. Amen. I hope to see you Wednesday. If not, I'll see you Sunday. And if not there, I'll see you here next week. Y'all have a blessed week.